Hello there. Well, the weather's been pretty dire of late, and I thought I'd just do a short video in the house here, and it's about maps. If you've watched a lot of the videos that I do, you'll know that I make use of old maps quite a lot. I mean, it was once the case. I remember years ago, I used to spend a lot of time in the Mitchell Library for various reasons. As far as the maps are concerned, I mean, I used to dig into old rubbish tips for bottles and clay pipes and stuff like that, and that was just one reason why I would maybe like to have a look at old maps. But there were other reasons. But it was in those days, it was the huge paper maps that I had to retrieve from the bowels of the building. And as was often the case, the area that I was interested in was either in the corner or the very edge of a map. And when I looked at the sort of index, I was never sure which map it was going to be. And after a while, they'd come up from the dusty depths of the building with a map, and I'd look at it and I'd go, no, I think it's the one to the left of that. And there would be a big sigh, and off they go again to get another map. But I used to love those days because they invariably ended with a few beers in the bon accord afterwards. But it's very different these days. The National Library of Scotland has an online map facility that is simply astonishing. It has every Ordnance Survey map, all the editions from the first edition dating to the 1850s and 1860s, right up to kind of modern times. It really is, whoever instigated and all the people that were involved in creating the National Library of Scotland's online map facility, I think need to be recognised in some way, because what they have done is just amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at some old maps here. Just very briefly, it's a short video, and I'll kind of end with one that's kind of a little bit more interesting than perhaps some of the other examples I'm going to give. I sometimes think that the first edition Ordnance Survey maps, as I say, dating to 1850s or 1860s, I sometimes think, and I'm probably totally wrong, that it's maybe a wee bit like the statistical accounts of Scotland. I think the first one of those was in the late 1700s. The second statistical account, I think, was the mid-19th century, and then there was another one. But the first statistical account, each of them from various areas of the country, they vary greatly, and it very much depended on the person who was writing up that statistical account. I think in most cases it's probably the minister in the church. And depending on his character and his interests, you often found that they went on and on and on, got into an awful lot of detail that you think, is this really necessary? You know, the days before radio and television, poor man probably had nothing else to do with his time. So he thought, I'm going to make a good job of this, to the extent where you sort of felt as if they were kind of mentioning every single plant in their parish. It's just, but that depth of detail varied. Some people didn't go into a lot of detail and just gave you the basic but essential bones of what went on in their area. And I sometimes think the first edition Ordnance Survey maps might have been similar, because depending on the area, you can see more detail than you can perhaps see in other areas. I I mean, there's some areas where they go down to detail, like piles of stones, which invariably happened in maybe hilly areas where there wasn't a great deal, there weren't many features other than sloping ground, and perhaps the person responsible for creating a mapping for that area thought he'd go into as much detail as he could. If there's a pile of stones there, that could be important, we'll put that on the map. But you don't always get that. It's just fascinating, as I say, the early maps. So we'll just have a look at the first one now. So this is the first edition Ordnance Survey map. It's the Newborough area, and this one dates to 1854. It shows details that only appear in the first edition Ordnance Survey map, but in subsequent editions and in modern OS maps, these features have vanished. And I think when they made these early maps, there must have been a certain element of oral tradition went on. People must have known that certain things happened in certain areas, and these traditions, oral traditions, have gone, and if they're no longer mentioned on the more recent maps, then how do we know that these things ever happened, other than perhaps from other sources and from the original maps themselves? You can see Parkhill Farm here near Newborough, and just to the east of that you have, it says the site of Wallace's camp, and just a little bit further up you can see Wallace's Bridge and the Battle of Black Ernside in the year 1300. Not sure if that's the correct year, but clearly this was a bit of a skirmish between William Wallace and some occupying English forces. The site of the camp and indeed mention of the battle, as I say, is no longer in the more recent maps, which is a great shame. In this second example, this is Perth, and again it's a first edition Ordnance Survey map, this time dating to 1860. And just near Perth's Old Bridge, you can see it says the supposed site of the Battle of the Clans between Clan Chatton and Clan Kay in 1396. And again, when you go into a modern Ordnance Survey map and you zoom in as much as you can, it's no longer mentioned. Which is, again, it's just a great shame. There's so much detail in some of these old maps. There's a barracks, a cavalry and infantry barracks, all sorts of stuff. Now, the third example is near Stirling, quite near Kildean. There's a market at Kildean. And again, it's the first edition Ordnance Survey map, this time dating to it was surveyed in 1861. And at the steading of Culloden, it says the site of Bridge. And bridges, the word bridge is done in these old kind of Gothic letters that indicate something pretty old. By the 1913 Ordnance Survey map, there's no mention of this bridge or the site of the bridge or anything, and it's not shown on modern maps. And just also on this map, you can see just at the edge of Stirling another old bridge, and this one here is supposed to have been the site of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and I think it was 1797 between William Wallace and English forces at that time occupying Stirling Castle and other English forces. There has been a little bit of debate as to whether the old bridge that is thought to be the site of that battle was the site of the battle, or whether the bridge at Kildean was the site of that battle. It's thought that English forces may have approached Stirling by an old Roman road. There is some doubt, or the actual course of the Roman road as it approaches Stirling from Bannockburn heading towards Bridge of Allen isn't clear. And it's not known whether it perhaps passed over this just close to Stirling, or whether it went over the bridge at Kildean, which is probable. Whether that means that the battle in 1297 took place at Culloden, not sure, but there has been some debate on that issue, and again it's just a shame that that feature is no longer shown on maps. Now this time we're heading near Forfar, between Forfar and Lunenhead. This is this first edition dating to 1861. Just quite near Lunenhead you can see mention of a camp. Doesn't say what sort of camp it is, or when it was a camp, or who used it as a camp. Is it Roman? Is it later than Roman? I don't know. But again, just the rather disappointing thing about that is that camp is shown on subsequent older Ordnance Survey maps, but in modern Ordnance Survey maps it's not mentioned. And I mean, it's easy to criticise, and you think, well, why is it not mentioned in modern maps? Have they just missed it out? And I think in most cases, because over time, towns become more developed, they expand, there's buildings getting built all over the place. In some cases, it's simply not practical to mention everything that's ever happened at a spot, because there's maybe houses at that spot now, and it's just there's only so much room on a map to mention things. Although, if you zoom in as much as you can on a modern OS map, there's plenty of room. But as I say, this particular camp isn't mentioned. Now, the final feature I'm going to mention is it's maybe a little bit more interesting than some of the other ones. And we're in Peebles. This is the first edition Ordnance Survey map. Let me just check this. It's 1856 that this was surveyed. And just to the west of Peebles, you can see an area of ground in which there is wording: detachment of rebel army encamped here 1745. And in modern OS maps, that mention of that is gone. And there's nothing, it's just a bit of parkland now. There's plenty of room to mention that. I don't know why they don't mention it. And I found that quite interesting. I just, I also, in addition to digging for old bottles, I also used to do a bit of metal detecting, and clearly that would be an area of interest, although like all these sort of things, you obviously need permission from the landowner to do anything. But I did a bit of rooting around in connection with this mention because I was interested in it. And in the National Archives, there is a bit of ephemera is not the word, it's a letter. It's an old letter titled Jacobite Soldiers on the Move. It's the Lord Justice Clark Fletcher reporting to the Duke of Newcastle on the 5th of November 1744. And it describes an army of rebels said to be about 3,000 men who arrived at Peebles on Saturday, commanded by Lord Perth, where they halted on Sunday. The cannon and the heavy baggage was sent that way. It also says that the other part of their army, commanded by the Pretender's son, was at Lauder. Sunday night and yesterday after it was dark, arrived at Kelso. This party is said to be about 4,000, and among them are the best of their men, the Camerons MacDonalds, and have no cannon and little baggage, more than what 30 carts on 12 horses lightly loaded carry, and one covered waggon with the Pretender's son's baggage, which is a fine gilt French strong box. Oh, the detail is just amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely astonishing stuff. The rather curious thing about this bit of information on, as I said, in the National Archives is I think it's wrong. I think they've made a slight blunder. when you look at the actual letter, they've cropped it too much, and they've actually cropped the right-hand side of the letter too much so that you can't see the full date. It can't, it simply can't be the 5th of November 1744 because Prince Charles Edward Stuart wasn't into Scotland at that time. He arrived in Scotland the next year in July 1745. And I think they've just made an error. This is 5th of November 1745, literally days before the Jacobite army in two wings or two groups marched south into England with the intention of taking London. But as we all know, they only got as far as Derby, unfortunately. So I have contacted the National Archives to tell them that I think it's incorrect and that the correct year is 1745. It's nevertheless an astonishingly interesting letter, and you know, I only went into that little bit of research, which is all online, because of that those few words on that 1856 Ordnance Survey map. And I strongly suspect there'll be a visit and a video in the Peebles area at some stage in the new year when the weather's good. I would say have a Merry Christmas, but in actual fact, I think many people don't have a Merry Christmas. They just sort of endure Christmas and New Year, to put up with it until it's all over. So, you know, it will soon be the new year, and it will all be over, and the days will start getting lighter, and we'll be able to get out there and do some walking and make some videos and stuff like that. So, take care, and hopefully the new year will be better for us all, and certainly, hopefully, better for the people of Ukraine. I'll see you all in the new year. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care.